All right, guys, so here is chapter 20, okay? So we've just finished with chapter 19, where it is revealed that Mr. Rochester was the gypsy the entire time. And, obviously he was, kind of revealing the truth to Jane about who she really is. The funny thing is that she doesn't really acknowledge that she actually feels that way. She kind of just brushes off like, it was you the whole time. So that's important, to think about going in. It's also important to notice that Mr. Rochester was not super excited to see Mr. Mason. Mr. Mason mentioned that they were good friends from a long time ago, but Mr. Rochester is kind of irritated to see him, which definitely suggests that we really don't know a lot about Mr. Rochester, neither does Jane. So then we get into chapter 20, okay? Some things gonna happen, chapter 20. So we're gonna wanna pay attention to the Gothic elements that happen at the beginning of this chapter, especially with the weather and the way that Jane is gonna start seeing ghostly apparitions. So she says, I had forgotten to draw my curtain, which I usually did, and also to let down my window blind. The consequence was that when the moon, which was full and bright, for the night was fine, came in her course to that space in the spooky opposite my casement, and looked in at me, through the unveiled panes, her glorious gaze roused me. Awaking in the dead of night, I opened my eyes on her disk, silver white and crystal clear. It was beautiful, but too solemn. I half rose and stretched my arm to draw the curtain. Notice how the moon is being described almost as though she were a person, like creeping in on Jane. Good God, what a cry! The night, its silence, its rest, was rent in twain by a savage, sharp, and shrilly sound that ran from end to end of Thornfield Hall. There was a shriek. My pulse stopped, my heart stood still, my stretched arm was paralyzed. The cry died, and was not renewed. Indeed, whatever being uttered that fearful shriek could not soon repeat it. Not the widest winged condor on the Andes could, twice in succession, send out such a yell from the cloud shrouding his ire. The thing delivering such utterance must rest ere it could repeat the effort. It came out of the third story, for it passed overhead, and we know that Grace Poole lives on the third story. And overhead, yes, in the room just above my chamber ceiling, I now heard a struggle, a deadly one, it seemed, from the noise, and a half-smothered voice shouted, Help, 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 3 times rapidly. Will no one come? It cried. And then, while the staggering and stamping went on idly, I distinguished through plank and plaster, Rochester, Rochester, for God's sake, come. A chamber door opened. Someone ran or rushed along the gallery. Another step stamped on the flooring above, and something fell, and there was silence. I put on some clothes, though horror shook all my limbs. I issued from my apartment. The sleepers were all aroused. Ejaculations, terrified murmurs sounded in every room. Door after door unclosed. One looked out, and another looked out. The gallery filled. Gentlemen and ladies alike had quitted their beds. And, oh, what is it? Who is hurt? What has happened? Fetch a light. Is it fire? Are there robbers? Where shall we run? Was demanded confusedly on all hands. But for the moonlight, they would have been in complete darkness. They ran to and fro. They crowded together. Some sobbed, some stumbled. The confusion was inextricable. Where the devil is Rochester? Cried Colonel Dent. I cannot find him in his bed. Here, here, was shouted in return. Be composed, all of you. I am coming. And the door at the end of the gallery opened, and Mr. Rochester advanced with a candle. He had just descended from the upper story. One of the ladies ran to him directly. She seized his arm. It was Miss Ingram. Shock. What an awful event has taken place, said she. Speak, let us know the worst at once. But don't pull me down or strangle me, he replied, for the Mrs. Eshtons were clinging about him now, and the 2 dowagers in vast white wrappers were bearing down on him like ships in full sail. All's right, he cried. It's a mere rehearsal of Much Ado About Nothing. Connections. Ladies, keep off, or I shall wax dangerous. And so he's saying he's not literally meaning it's a rehearsal of Much Ado About Nothing, the play we just studied. He's saying, you guys are making a big deal out of nothing. You're building a mountain out of a molehill. You guys are making Much Ado About Nothing. And dangerous he looked. His black eyes darted sparks. Calming himself by an effort, he added, A servant has had the nightmare, that is all. She is an excitable, nervous person. She constructed her dream into an apparition or something of that sort, no doubt, and has taken a fit with fright. Now then, I must see you all back into your rooms, for till the house is settled, she cannot be looked after. Gentlemen, have the goodness to set the ladies the example. Miss Ingram, I am sure you will not fail in evincing superiority to idle terrors. Amy and Louisa, return to your nests like a pair of doves as you are. Mesdames to the dowagers. You will take cold to a dead certainty if you stay in the chill gallery any longer. And so, by dint of alternate coaxing and commanding, he contrived to get them all at once more enclosed in their separate dormitories. I did not wait to be ordered back to mine, but retreated unnoticed, as unnoticed as I had left it. Not, however, to go to bed. On the contrary, I began and dressed myself carefully. The sounds I had heard after the scream and the words that had been uttered had probably been heard only by me, for they had proceeded from the room above mine. But they assured me that it was not a servant's dream which had thus struck horror through the house, and that the explanation Mr. Rochester has given was merely an invention framed to pacify his guests. She knows that Mr. Rochester is lying about there being a nightmare or someone having a nightmare. She's like, I'm going to go investigate what this is. When dressed, I sat a long time by the window, looking out over the silent grounds and silvered fields, and waiting for I knew not what. It seemed to me that some event must follow the strange cries, struggle, and call. No. Stillness returned. Each murmur and movement ceased gradually, and in it about an hour Thornfield was again as hushed as a desert. It seemed that sleep and night had resumed their empire. Meantime the moon declined. She was about to set. Again, the fact that the moon is a person is being personified is important. Not liking to sit in the cold and darkness, I thought I would lie down on my bed, dressed as I was. I left the window and moved with little noise across the carpet. As I stooped to take off my shoes, a cautious hand tapped low at the door. Am I wanted? I asked. Are you up? Asked the voice I expected to hear, viz. My master's, Mr. Rochester. Yes, sir. And dressed? Yes. Come out then, quietly. I obeyed. Mr. Rochester stood in the gallery holding a light. I want you, he said. Come this way. Take your time and make no noise. My slippers were thin. I could walk the matted floor as softly as a cat. He glided up the gallery and up the stairs and stopped in the dark, low corridor of the fateful third story. I had followed and stood at his side. Have you a sponge in your room? He asked in a whisper. Yes, sir. Have you any salts? Volatile salts? Smelling salts. So if you don't know what smelling salts are, they're a very pungent thing that helps people who have fainted or become unconscious wake up. Yes, go back and fetch both. I returned, sought the sponge on the washstand, the salts in my drawer, and once more retraced my steps. He still waited. He held a key in his hand. Approaching one of the small black doors, he put it in the lock. He paused and addressed me again. You don't turn sick at the sight of blood. I think I shall not. I have never been tried yet. I felt a thrill while I answered him, but no coldness and no faintness. Just give me your hand, he said. It will not do to risk a fainting fit. I put my fingers into his. Warm and steady, was his remark. He turned the key and opened the door. I saw a room I remembered to have seen before the day Mrs. Fairfax showed me over the house. It was hung with tapestry, but the tapestry was now looped up in one part, and there was a door apparent which had been concealed. This door was open. A light shone out of the room within. I heard thence a snarling, snatching sound, almost like a dog quarreling. Mr. Rochester, putting down his candle, said to me, Perfect. Thank you. Hello.